ich meine, wir von MainbornWolff zahlen lassen, du machst das nächste Mal wieder fett. Also,
Wie bitte?
wir von MainbornWolff macht das nächste Mal wieder fett.
Ja, also ich würde jetzt keine große Werbung machen. Ich würde halt nur sagen, am Ende des Vortrags, dass wir halt Entwickler suchen. Auch nicht dabei? Oder, ich meine, ich kann laut reden. Also, alles gut.
Dabei sein sollen. Wir haben das heute erst ist heute angeliefert bekommen. Und es funktioniert irgendwie nicht wirklich. Es rauscht extrem, also viel zu laut, dass es nicht tut. Ich habe mir gemerkt, dass es zu 80% rauscht und zu 10%.
Ja, komm, also wenn die nachher ganz ruhig sind, das kriegen, also das passt schon. Also mich macht das nicht so.
Vielleicht passt die Akustik ein bisschen zu auf.
Ja. Achso, nee, stand aber 18, mir ist das wurscht, 1845 habt ihr
Genau.
beim Meetup
Florian fällt ja aus.
Achso, ja, mir ist es, ich kann auch ein bisschen langsamer reden.
Das waren ja technische Verzögerungen heute.
Ja.
Also die haben uns erst aufgehört um 6. Also.
Ja, der hat... Ach, du kannst live auch sehen, wie viele Leute zugucken. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Ja, vielleicht wegen der Umgebungs... Ich kann noch die ganze Zeit ein bisschen was erzählen. Ich weiß dann nicht, ob das, wenn wir Zuschauer haben, ist das vielleicht ein bisschen langweilig. Wer hätte das gedacht? Ist ein Schatz. Was kriegst du? 2 Euro? Sicher? Danke.
Minuten haben wir gerade gesagt, vor 5 Minuten.
Dann warte ich.
Also gleich noch 2, 3 Minuten.
Gut. Ich halte schon aus. Wird schon gehen. Nee, er war schon drin. Er war schon drin. Ja, komm.
Okay, ja, das Mikrofon kriegen wir leider nicht hin, das surrt und rauscht.
Ja, wenn die leise sind, dann kriegen wir das hin. Wenn die ein bisschen
Kannst du
lauter.
vielleicht sagen, so noch aus, aber wenn der Thorsten nicht sagt, also die Show ganz, sagt er vergisst dann nicht, dass er nicht ein bisschen anders sagt. Also du dann sagen, so, sorry für, dass sie leise sein sollen, weil die Anlage hier ist nicht ganz.
Ja.
Einheiten.
Ja, genau. Genau.
Ich bin der Dirk, hallo. Hallo Claudia. Von?
Hier vom Innovator Space.
Ah, okay.
Wir sind die Hosts sozusagen.
So machen wir normalerweise nur uns dauert.
Ich würde jetzt sagen, lass gut sein und wir starten, oder? Weil die Leute warten ja
Ja, ich
auch.
denke auch, dass wir das nicht hinbekommen.
Alles gut. Kriegen wir, wenn die leise sind, müssen wir ein bisschen lauter reden. Das passt schon. Thorsten?
Gut behandelt.
Now we are starting. I don't have a mic, so I'm trying to be very as loud as possible. Tonight we're looking into the stormy clouds, but
Oh Gott.
still louder. Tonight, now really, joke, louder. Be quiet. So tonight we are looking into this stormy clouds, but I already can convince you I'm still bullish despite this stormy clouds. Why I'm bullish? Because I haven't counted everybody that joined us tonight, but we have, let's say, 150 people here gathered in Schwabing, despite the fact that we have the semi-final. The FC Bayern is playing some 2 or 3 kilometers here, and this shows, for me personally, this is a very, I'm an investor, so this is a bullish signal. I also would say this is a bullish signal that we gather here. It's a technology that came rarely out of the wood a couple of weeks or months ago. Maybe I learn a little bit more tonight. And also, I'm totally bullish, and I'm looking forward to learn a lot tonight. When you think back 1 year ago, the same day, maybe last year, everybody was concerned. Yeah, the question we had last year is, do we get SegWit? Because we need something to scale Bitcoin. We all together, I think we formed the opinion that this will be the future, but we need something that scales. So today we can say, hey, we have Lightning, and today we have the first meetup just dedicated for the Lightning network. So this is also, for me personally, a really, really bullish signal, and I'm looking forward to hear more. We have experts today. We have Christian Decker from Blockstream. We have also someone that gives us insights into the legal aspect, not especially about Lightning, but the legal aspect, which we hear later on. And we start with an intro tonight. We always have in our community or in our meetups, we have the ceremony that we start with an intro, and the later the evening, the deeper we get into the technology. No further ado, let's start with the colleague from MainbornWolff. And excuse me, thank you, Michael, for correcting me. And first of all, or before I proceed, I want to say thank you. Thank you for two people here. First of all, I would like to thank Michael for putting everything here together, for bringing Christian to Munich. Thank you so much. And second, I want to thank Claudia tonight for providing us this space here that provides us the opportunity to learn more about the Lightning Network. I would like to hand over to you and hear a little bit more about the space and some introduction words. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, welcome tonight. It's obviously not me providing the space, it's the Innovative Space team, the association. And the idea was, the founders wanted people to connect, to get together, to move on with their ideas, to make things happen, to be innovators. That's the idea. And so we were able to convince the city of Munich to provide this room for us for a few months, to be able to have this beautiful event like this. It's phenomenal to see all the people here. You should see that from this side. It's really good to have you here. And it's great that we talk about such important things here. Well, yeah, without any sponsors, so help yourself to get a beer on the bar, please. And if you have any ideas, you want to join us, you want to connect and have ideas, what you want to do here in the space, just approach me, approach a colleague on the bar, and we could do something together as well. So have a great night, enjoy your time here.
Thank you so much again. Next, I would like to ask Dirk Röhr from MainbornWolff, a Munich, but no further ado, please, Dirk, let us know more about the Lightning Network and the basics about it. Thanks.
Okay, so sorry for the German slides. I just learned that I'm supposed to make everything in English, so I have to come up with all the stories I have to tell you now in English. I hope translation works. And by the way, I know why you all are here and you're not watching the game, because you're all Dortmund fans, obviously. Okay, so I'm doing this presentation basically for one reason, like to give everybody like a smooth entry into the technology. So it's very basic. It's no tech at all. I'm just trying to get the basics together before Christian enters the stage, and then it's got to hitting you hard with code and stuff. Okay, so basically, as Thorsten already put it, last year we had a problem with scaling, and there is a solution. And to explain the solution, I would like to take you to a little journey to an island called Yap in Micronesia. Who knows where Micronesia is located? Okay, at least one. You're a diver, I guess? No, no diver? Oh, okay, perfect. So a personal fan, I appreciate.
No, I mean not from you, about Yap.
Ah, okay. So basically, okay. This was one occasion to lie, but you just missed it. Okay, so basically, Yap is in Micronesia. Micronesia is south of China and east of the Philippines, and the story I'm telling you is absolutely true. So basically, the Yappies, 1,500 years ago, roughly, they invented the world's most heaviest currency, the so-called Rai, R-A-I. They look like this. They could be the size of a palm of a hand, and they could be as huge as like 1 or 2 meters in diameter. Big, and it's like a ton or 2 tons of stone. It's really, really heavy. So that's how they came up with a completely currency based on trust and based on decentralized. What they did basically is all the eldest on the island, each of the small villages they had an eldest, only male. The feminism wasn't really developed 1,500 years ago. And they kept track of everything. Like basically they had a ledger and they kept track who owns what Rai. for example, the rice, because they had inflation in mind, they were mining those stones in Palau, which is an island 400 kilometers southeast of Yap, because the minerals of the stones were very particular. And so they could prevent people from inflating the currency. And one stone dropped right in the front of the beach, dropped to the bottom of the ocean. But this was not a problem, because they just memorized there is one coin down at the coral reef, and they could move it and could exchange it when it comes to like value exchange and do a trade. So now they want to do a trade. So two people are trading, and the problem they have is they have to tell their eldest that they have did a trade. And then the eldest has the challenge that everybody on the island must know about the trade as well, because at the end of the day, all ledgers must be synced. Okay? So basically what they do, this kind of transmitting information is called broadcast. So that's what the Bitcoin network does with the nodes. So when the miners spread out the information about a new built block, they spread it out in the network, and they have to reach a certain percentage, as I guess the majority knows, 50% plus 1, to reach consensus. So basically this is broadcast. And the Bitcoin network is very similar to the old Ethernet hubs. Perhaps some of you still remember those Ethernet hubs. And in the very beginning of the internet itself, these internet hubs worked alike, that any information coming into port 28 must be transmitted to all the other ports. So all ports were in sync as well. To give you a comparison, let's say you will send the graphic, which is like 1 megabyte in size, to a network of 100 people. You had to copy the file 99 times so that all the nodes of the network will have the same file available. If you would run the internet today with this kind of technology, we will all be screwed. Because if one of you guys opens up Facebook, if you have still a Facebook account, so everyone in the internet would need to download this particular Facebook site. And this would basically mean the internet will come to a complete stop. It would not work. And this is why they came up with something called unicast. Unicast is you send from one point to another, from A to B, and you choose a way through the nodes, through the network, and only those are, so to say, touched with the files. And you keep the internet running. So basically, what unicast is for the internet, Lightning is for Bitcoin. And to give you an example, let's say, because we're on an island, it's very romantic and palm trees and stuff. So we say Adam is buying stuff from Eva. Eva runs a little shop. He goes there every morning and buys his coffee and his newspaper. In the real world, it would be with paper. In the Bitcoin world, this would mean that with approximately 7 transactions per second and up to 40 minutes in block time, it's not really a business. So you would go to the counter, buy a cup of coffee, and then you would wait 40 minutes until you are able to leave the cafe. So either your coffee is cold, or you're missing meetings, or your work. So that doesn't work. So with the Lightning network, they would open a channel. So Adam and Eve, they would open a channel, and they would both use a vault. And the vault with a multi-signature version of it. So basically both have their keys, and only with both of the keys the vault would open. And the second step, they would upload stuff into the vault. For this example, it would be Adam. He would put in 2 Bitcoins. You can buy a lot of coffee with 2 Bitcoins. So basically, by doing this, the vault is loaded. And in the second step, a receipt, let's call it a receipt, would be, this transaction would be stored onto the blockchain as an opening balance. So it would be stored 2 bitcoins from Adam. At the same time, Eve would be able to look up and say, okay, I can trust Adam with an amount of, like in shopping stuff, in items, with a value of 2 bitcoins, because the 2 bitcoins are locked. So there's trust in this very moment. And then they would do some trades. So he would buy his coffee and his newspaper. And for example, he buys them for 0.5 bitcoins. I know that's a hell of a price for coffee, but just for the sake of the argument. So this would be then copied as a receipt to both of them, of course, with the updated balances. So if Adam spent half a bitcoin, so Eve owns now half a bitcoin, and of course, Adam owns only 1.5 bitcoins. And with this, sorry, that was too fast. So basically what they can do now is they can exchange, go back and forth all day long, as long as they are not purchasing stuff or exchanging stuff which is exceeding the value of their personal balance on this receipt. So basically, now Eve could buy stuff from Adam for 0.5 bitcoins. They could go back and forth all day long. Until one of them says, okay, we are closing the channel, we are stopping, and then they are transmitting the receipt to the blockchain. And at this very moment, basically the balance is closed, and the closing balance is written to the blockchain, and both of them receive the amount of bitcoins which were stored on the receipt. And basically that means that with Lightning Network, you could do thousands of transactions between a party of 2, and you only need 2 transactions on the actual Bitcoin blockchain, the opening balance and the closing balance. And this is the major advantage if you're talking about Lightning. But there's more. Let's say Adam and Eve, they don't have a channel. So you can, of course, you can open a channel, but perhaps there is a detour. Perhaps they have a connection through Joseph and Martin. So Adam can reach Eve through those. It's like the Facebook idea. Through 7 steps, you know, or through 7 connections, you know the whole world. So there's the theory that, you know, 7 steps down the road, you can reach literally everybody, even Mr. Donald Trump. So you know somebody who knows somebody, etc., etc. So basically, that's the same idea. And how does it work? Of course, the network looks for the most fastest and cheapest way to reach the destination. In this case, that's Eve. The Lightning Network is up. This is a screenshot, I think, 2 days ago. So the nodes are at 1,587 nodes out there. And that would be the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, just shoot. Thank you very much. Questions? So I guess the presentation was clear. That's good. Thank you very much. Then it's Dieter.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for some words of introduction for our next speaker. First of all, I would like to thank our next speaker, a lawyer from. Next, I would like to thank our next speaker, Dieter Baumann, a lawyer from Munich, specialized in the field of the intersection of technology and law. And I would like to thank him for sponsoring the pizza we get after the break. So, yeah.
Thanks to all of you for the warm welcome. I was not only for the pizza, but topic as well. How do we lawyers, how does German law, how does European law qualify payments with bitcoins or other virtual currencies? And can we really talk about currency? Are bitcoins, are they money? How are they legally classified? So we will have to look at my agenda. So the general question is, what is money? Are cryptocurrencies, are they money? If not, what are they? And how are they classified by civil law, by contract law? If you enter into a contract, if you buy anything, a product, services, whatever, and you pay with bitcoins, is that classified as a civil contract under German civil code or even other European regulations? So this is the one aspect I will show you. The other one is the fact of financial supervision. So with regard to mining of bitcoins, and the most interesting topic of our times, ICOs, how are they qualified with regard to financial supervisory law? And last but not least, tax aspects. So if you acquire bitcoins for a low amount and sell them for a larger amount, how would that qualify with regard to tax law? So I will try to guide you through. And the funny thing is that you came up with that island because I go back to history as well and say virtual payments, can they be regarded as a currency, in fact, and how did it all start? And if you had that example in mind, we started with exchanging goods for other goods. This is how in former times we paid each other. That's developed to money, so we had coins that were like stones, like you explained, and then we had paper money. The paper money went on to bank deposit money. We have electronic money today, and now we have virtual payments, and you will see in short notice that we are back to the roots legally. So I already, when we start with civil law, have a look how do transactions when you pay with bitcoins qualify under civil law. If you want to fulfill a contract, if you buy whatever, a car, a service, whatever possible, the buyer is obliged to fulfill his obligations by providing money. So can one fulfill its obligations under the civil code by providing bitcoins? So, and the answer is already there. It's the last bullet point. You may not, under European civil law, fulfill your contracts by with bitcoins, even though unless your contractual partner is going to accept it. I will show you later. But what is money in general? And the interesting thing is that neither in German law nor in any other European law there is a legal definition of what money really is. There are only elements that money needs to have, and it needs to be state approved. It needs to be a mean of exchange. It stores a certain value, and it is a unit of account. So if I buy something for €100, I can compare whether it is cheap or not. So these are the elements, but there is no legal definition for that. What is a legal mean of payment? So in German it would be a Zahlungsinstrument. This is something that is accepted as the legal currency of a country. Like, for example, in most of the European countries, it is the euro, or in the States, US dollar, or in the UK, British pounds. So this is the legal mean of payment, which are qualified to be approved by law, and everybody in that country needs to accept payments in that legal means of payment. What is electronic money? This is something, is going to be issued by, for example, a bank, and you can claim to that bank to change it into legal means of payment again. And the same goes for bank deposit money. It's the so-called Buchgeld in German, where you can ask your bank to be handed over paper money for that. And if you look at bitcoins, well, if you look at the elements of money, well, it is a means of exchange, yes. Does it store value? Don't know, probably. And is it a unit of account? Yes, it is. However, it's neither state approved nor generally accepted. Nobody is obliged to accept payments in bitcoins or any other virtual currency. And there is no claim against anyone to transfer that to a legal means of money, to a gesetzliches Zahlungsinstrument. So conclusion, it has a money function, but it is no means of payment within the meaning of the German civil code, nor of any other European civil code. But how do we deal it then when you find somebody who accepts payment in Bitcoin? What is it then legally? And we're back to the roots. It's an exchange of goods. Legally, it is considered to be an exchange of goods in the meaning of section 480 of the German Civil Code, if anybody wants to look that up, which means we are back to where we came from legally. We have an exchange of goods, anything you buy against bitcoins. This is how, for the time being, it is considered legally under civil law. If we have a look on the financial regulatory assessment of bitcoins, the German Finance Supervisory Authority, BaFin, considers bitcoins to be financial instruments in the meaning of the German Banking Act, KWG, which has quite severe consequences, in particular if you think of issuing security tokens or participating in ICOs. This is the big topic of today. For the time being, utility tokens, most ICOs have been issuing utility tokens because they are qualifying as financial instruments, but they don't qualify under the German Banking Act. The most exciting solution we will have to face is the first, if you issue really security tokens, which are considered to be Wertpapiere, securities under the German Banking Act. This is really something interesting which is going to happen in the near future. But if we just regard the mining of bitcoins, for example, if you do that for private purposes, even though they are considered to be financial instruments, they don't acquire any approvals of the financial authorities. You can do that without being required to have a specific approval for that. This may change if you do that commercially. So if you having a company which does the mining for a lot of people, you may qualify under the German Banking Act for mining pools, for example, and even for commercial exchange and bill transactions. The same is true. So this might be a problem if you already do that and do that without being approved by the financial authorities. You might run into trouble. And trading is the other topic, and this is the connection to ICOs again. It's not just issuing tokens, it's also trading tokens. This might qualify again under the German Banking Act or other European acts. You know, in Europe, in the European Union, we have the so-called European passport. If you have an approval by BaFin, you can do your business in all of the other European countries because the BaFin approval is being passported to other European countries, and vice versa. If you have an approval in Liechtenstein, for example, or in France or in Ireland or wherever, you can passport this to Germany as well. You have to just show BaFin that you do have that approval, Irish approval, for example, and then you would be allowed to do your business in Germany. This is quite interesting for European countries, and this is why a lot of ICOs will start in Liechtenstein, for example, because they can passport their approval to Germany, and the Liechtenstein authority is quite advanced with regard to the German BaFin. So this is really, this is going to become interesting in the next days or weeks. Last but not least, tax classification of virtual payments. The tax authorities, they don't care as long as they can get your money, bitcoins, whatever. So they will look what you do, and there are certain different taxes. There are income taxes. So if you have an income from business operations and with virtual payments, you are subject, and this is sustainable. If you offer mining pool not only for private reasons, for example, this is taxable. You will have to pay income tax on this. On the transfer, also this is subject to income tax, and if and most important, private disposals. If you acquire bitcoins, for example, and sell them in a shorter period than 12 months, this is subject to income tax. And having seen the development of the bitcoins in the last year, I think a lot of transactions qualify under income tax laws, and I'm not sure if everybody will file that in his tax declaration. But I'm not a tax lawyer. Value-added tax. The first legal decision of the European Court of Justice, it's one of the first decisions on bitcoins and payments on bitcoins, was made in 2015, where the European Court of Justice decided that changing virtual currencies into fiat currencies does not qualify under VAT, which is quite important, and which needs to be respected in all of the European states. And the delivery of bitcoins against payment is another service in the sense of the VAT Act, and therefore subject to VAT. Don't ask any details, I'm not a tax lawyer. A problem for companies might be, how do they evaluate anything that they acquired with bitcoins on their balance sheet, because of the bitcoins and other currencies being so volatile, to find the right amount to put on your balance sheet. So just a short glance on mining. What is mining under civil law? And it is considered to qualify under section 9050, which gives you the question, who becomes the owner of the new mined bitcoins, and this is regulated there. This already in 2011, BaFin made their statement on mining. This is not up to date anymore, but I wanted to address your attention on the German Bundesverband blockchain, the Blockchain Federal Association. They are quite advanced with regard to the development of virtual currencies, not only in Germany, but in Europe, and how this should be legally qualified and assessed. And their aim is that Germany should play a pioneering role in Europe, that BaFin has already or is about to increase its capacities because of the demands that there is a new technology. And the ICO market shows that there is a new gray capital market, or has already developed, and there will be regulation. We just discussed that bilaterally. I think in the next 2 years we will find a new regulation on how ICOs should be handled. Well, and the story is never ending, because I think the blockchain technology will have an impact not only on payments or on ICOs and on the capital market, but also on our notary publics, for example. We might not need them any longer in the near future, because shares can be booked on the blockchain, and we might not need to notaries or commercial registers what we have today. So this will have a severe impact on, well, anything. That's, I think I'm done. Yes. Any questions? Well, it depends. Capital gains is income tax, and if you are subject to income tax if you sell something within that 12-month period. So you're subject to capital gains tax. As I said, I'm not a tax lawyer. I don't know. So you will need to raise that question. But you are subject to tax, definitely, yes. You said you're not a tax lawyer, so again, tax. I'm asking again a tax question, but you said before that if you keep the Bitcoin for 1 year, it's exempted from specific tax. I have a question. If you use the Bitcoin to get other coins like airdrops, sometimes on the internet I read that this extends this time span from 1 year to 10 years because you make an income with the Bitcoin. And then I read articles that say, no, it's not true. It's always 1 year. Do you have any opinion on that, or is it too much tax law touching here? It is too much tax laws, but still I have an opinion. I don't think that it qualifies for tax because the 12-month period is done, so you can do whatever you want. But the problem is that we don't have any high court decision about that. So you will find all opinions as long as we have the first court to decide upon that. And then it will climb up until the Bundesfinanzhof, and then we'll know. Well, I think some authorities, I don't know who is responsible, Gewerbeaufsichtsamt. Yeah, there are a lot of rights combined in that. So of course you have your freedom of whom you will do your business with. That's true. But if somebody with whom you are in contact and contracting, and he decides that he has entered into an obligation and he wants to fulfill this obligation with a gesetzliche Zahlungsmittel, you are by law required to do so unless you cancel the contract. So I think it's an opportunity to have both, to have virtual currencies and to have fiat currencies. So
yes, please. Will running a Lightning node require a bank license? So in some sense, what a Lightning node does is very similar to what a credit card company does. Provides liquidity for a few seconds to forward a payment. But in another sense, it's very different because a Lightning node is technically not able to lose money from anyone else. It can only lose its own money.
well, thank you for the questions, because for this question, because I think this question really shows how interesting law is, because law has no solution yet for this question. And we will have to find a solution on how we qualify what you're doing, what the Lightning node really is, to what it could be compared, and then we'll find a Schublade to put it in. So, and if there is no such a Schublade, we will create one. So we are running behind the technology which is developing. But this is how actually law also works. We have a certain uncountable amount of regulations, but still the developments, technology or society, they develop so fast. So we are always trying to find solutions for new developments in society, technology, whatever. I just told you initially that 20 years ago, IT law didn't practically exist because nobody needed it. Today, IT law is one of the most important part of the law, and if you look to the new data regulation that comes up on the 25th of May, that will change how company works immensely. you see how things develop. We might have a solution for that in next year. Don't know.
We had a question in the front here, please.
Let's just assume you sell your Bitcoin after 2 years or so you're not obliged to paying taxes. Would you still file it in your report to evade some future changes or something similar?
You'd rather too, because you have nothing to lose. You can show them, okay, I bought them 24 months ago, and their value now is that. And the funny thing is, I've been asked by clients who had their problems with banks because their banks they made or they changed virtual currencies into fiat currencies. And the banks, they really wanted to know when they acquired their virtual currencies because they wanted to assess whether there is a tax obligation or not. And they couldn't really understand that the mining process is an ongoing one and that you cannot really stick, okay, I mined this on the 26th of whatever. So again, a problem where there is no real solution yet. Yes. So the first one you sell is the first one you acquire? But can you determine in your Bitcoin wallet which first came in? And you have the dates of the transaction. Okay, then you're fine. Okay. And why do we need any regulations? Well, why do you need lawyers? Good question. Well, for example, ICOs, if I take that example, is a playground for money laundering activities. And there is a certain interest that money laundering is prohibited. So there is a need why you need some kind of regulation. Not anything is bad. Everything. Yes, sure. Sure. You would probably be held liable for not accepting, like in the other question we just had, for not accepting the legal currency here, but you would participate, sure, and you would qualify under tax law, definitely.
Maybe another tricky question. When I sell my Bitcoin Cash today, which were forked less than a year ago, but I bought them in 2013 or something, is that a year since I got them, or is it less, or is it unclear?
I'm not a tax lawyer, guys. I don't know. Well, the interesting question is that could you use the loss that you suffered to reduce your tax exposure? That would be probably interesting. There's no loss. If there was a loss. There is no loss. Okay. Nee, wir können noch machen, aber ich weiß nicht, wie viel Zeit ihr habt. Okay.
The initial price is basically the date you acquired them and the price you acquired them at.
Okay. It depends on the viewpoint, because there are at least 3 different possibilities on how to qualify that. One is yours, where basically the fork date is the airdrop date. Yeah. The other one is that a fork is basically a stock split. And a stock split can be done in the case that when you first acquire the first asset, it's split. Therefore, the history is there. So you can actually prove with Bitcoin Cash that you acquired them at that point in time. And then where it splits with that option is how do you value the purchase of Bitcoin Cash at that time, for example. Because you have the Bitcoin price and then it's split. So you have the Bitcoin price and the Bitcoin Cash is basically acquired without any cost, and that's kind of a problem. You can either do that, that's the simple case. The more problematic case is at the fork time, you basically split it up into the different, like Bitcoin, for example, is 10 euros, Bitcoin Cash is €1, so you have like a 10-to-1 split. And then you have the acquiring price and split that to that, and then you can calculate it out. But I'm not a tax lawyer.
But more qualified than I am. Any more questions? No.
what we see here now is the text base meeting the law and the state. And what we see here is also the state fighting somehow, because in some sense this is really new. The internet already was new. What we hear now, that Datenschutzgesetz now is so important. When you do a merger and acquisition, Datenschutzgesetz is really, really important. And in 20 years, I think the most important laws, maybe there will come new laws, are regarding Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Just a small comment from my side. But we had
Won't take 20 years. Give us 2 or 3 years. Won't take 20.
This time faster.
If somebody has issued a coin which is a security and he doesn't want to move out of Germany, what would you recommend to this person?
With regard to doing an ICO or with respect? Okay. Well, there is something called a gesetzliches Rückwirkungsverbot, a term that I don't know in English, and which means something which wasn't forbidden when you did it. You cannot go after that. So if there is a new law, or if the BaFin clarifies how they consider how they want to deal with security tokens, there will be a starting point so that you can arrange your affairs on not to harm any laws that might come into force, or where BaFin says that will be applicable. So I think, don't know if that answers your question. Or just apply for approval, because that happened in other fields as well. For example, in 2009, the new payment directive, which regulates payments, became into force in Germany, and it takes companies until today. There are still companies who don't know about that law and that they qualify and that they need an approval. And then they can apply at BaFin to get that approval. And if the authorities see, okay, there is somebody willing to fulfill the legal requirements, they rather help than punish. So my experience with BaFin, for example, is a very positive one. If you address them, if you show them what your client is doing, how the business is running, if you get into contact with them, explain them, they even invite you to explain your business model, and then they raise questions, okay, don't you want to structure that differently to avoid being subject to some requirements that you not necessarily need? So there is a quite positive dialogue between persons who apply for approvals and the authorities. So it's, I think once there will be a regulation, you will see, you will ask a lawyer, and then he'll tell you if you qualify for approval or how to act to not be subject to an approval.
There is no law which forbids security.
Mach mal einen Termin aus.
Okay, sorry. Keine Fragen mehr.
Does that mean that the assets which occurred earlier are not subject for the laws developed in the future?
No.
And repeat the question.
I mean, does it mean that the assets which were occurred in the past are not subject of the laws which will be developed in the future? Or in actually?
No, you cannot say it like this, because the point is that there might be, or there are existing laws, and that your assets could qualify to be subject under the law. That for the time being, there is no general ruling, there is no court ruling, there is no administrative authority who told you so that it qualified. But if there is if law is developing and there is a common sense that assets qualify under the German Banking Act, for example, they qualified from the beginning. The authority will not go, most probably not go after you if you said, okay, I just learned that and now I want to apply for an approval. They will rather help you to fulfill all the legal requirements. But it is, and that's the interesting thing, it is an ongoing story and development.
Interrupt this discussion, but the legal aspects are complex, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of demand for this new legal aspects. But on the other hand, we also want to follow somehow our structure. So my question for you right now is, would you like to have a break right now, or should we continue right now? Just first question, who of you want to have a break?
What's next?
Okay, what's next? Next after the break is our speaker, Christian Decker, from Blockstream, and it's about the Lightning Network and the implication of the second layer scaling technology.
So I would prefer to have the presentation first.
Okay. Who of you does want to have a break first? So we have the jury. Michael is the jury. This is the guys with the break. And who of you wants to proceed right now? The majority wants to proceed. I'm happy to welcome tonight Christian Decker from Blockstream. As I already mentioned, really quick, but let me take the time to introduce him in an appropriate manner, is a developer of the Bitcoin core network and a researcher. He did the first PhD solely on Bitcoin in 2012. He's from Zurich, he studied and he's working at the Zurich ETH, and I'm really looking forward, because now we proceed in the depth to get knowledge about the second layer scaling solution and especially the Lightning Network. That said, let's see how the technology is working out.
Let's hope it works better than the
Just, Christian, just let me know when you're finished. Until then, I will take the time to have two more comments. If you know a space or spaces that we can use for our meetup, please let us know. We're especially interested in spaces that are bigger even than this one. And the second thing is, if you know sponsors, like people from Weitenauer, the lawyer, or sponsors, if you're a technology company and want to support us, if you're a company that wants to hire and wants to support us, however, we can provide you with presence here. But we are also looking for sponsors that support our community. So that said, this little ad introduction. The technology is running. No further ado, Christian. Thank you so much.
So yes, let's take out my shouty shout face voice. As he said, I'm Christian Decker. I'm a software engineer at Blockstream. I should mention Blockstream has a lot of conspiracy theories around it, so all of the views that I tell you about today are mine, not Blockstream's. All comments about other currencies are also mine, not Blockstream's. Yeah, so I'm a software engineer. I mostly work on code, and I've been previously called a coffee compiler, because I turn coffee into code. And so today's talk is mainly about how to buy coffee, which I like, at lightning speed. Okay, so before we get started, we first need to figure out how to click go ahead. OK. That's not the first slide I had. So before we actually get into the lightning talk, I need to first reiterate some basic concepts about how Bitcoin works. This is a technical talk, so I'm sorry if I'm losing some of you guys, but we can try to catch you up later again. This is basically a talk that I gave a few times at university to computer science students, so it might be normal to get lost at some point. That being said, it's also quite visual and should be OK to follow along. OK. So before we actually get into how Lightning does what Lightning does, we need to reiterate some Bitcoin basics. First of all, if we want to transfer 6 Bitcoins to somebody, how do we do that? We create a transaction. This transaction basically says, hey, here I have some coins. Please retransmit them to somebody else. And what we have on the right side is what's called an output. An output basically is just an assignment of a value to an address, or as we shall later see, to a script, actually. Where do these funds come from? Well, they come from the inputs. Inputs is basically just some value that I own, where the script says, hey, if Christian signs with his private key, then this transfer of value is OK. In addition to what we actually want to transfer, the 6 Bitcoins to the coffee shop, we also transfer a remainder of the 9 that we fed into the transaction. We reassign it into 6, which is the actual payment, and 2, which is our change. Does anybody? That's what I want to hear. The eagle eyes among you will have spotted it. 6 plus 2 doesn't really work out to be 9. And I'm from Switzerland. I'm really good with money. So the remainder that is not assigned during this reassignment of value is basically a free floating amount that any miner will be able to grab for himself. And we call it a fee because it sort of supports the network activity as such. For the remainder of this talk, we just ignore fees. Just keep in mind, we need them, and they're sort of annoying to carry around. But for the basic principles, we don't need them. Now, the next part is, how did we get hold of these coins initially? Well, at some point, we had a transaction that gave us these coins, right? So the inputs of my new transaction are basically the outputs of a previous transaction. So what I do is if I try to reassign Bitcoins from one place to another, I tell you, hey, I take the coins that I received back then with this transaction, and I redistribute them like this. And here's my signature to prove that this is all OK. How do we set up the conditions of who can spend coins? This is basically the scripts that I mentioned before. These are there are 2 kinds of scripts. There are input scripts and output scripts. What you basically do is you execute the output script, and then you execute the input script. And if the I think it is. Well, anyway, you execute them back to back, and if at the end of the execution you return true, then that basically means that the transaction has been authorized correctly. Now, of course, all of them have scripts, and in the common case, the output script that we have usually just says, hey, if you get a valid signature from private keys, from matching public key such and such, then this is OK to reassign. OK. That's all the basics we need. We're not talking about blockchain. We're not talking about anything else. Not about confirmation, at least at this point. OK, so let's buy a coffee on the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm on the left, and my coffee that I want to buy is on the right. So what I do is basically I approach the counter, I ask for my coffee, I get my invoice, and now I create a transaction that performs the transfer, in this case 1 Bitcoin to the barista that I'd like to pay, and the remainder back to me. Now we take this transaction, we broadcast it in the network, and eventually the entire network will know about my transaction. They will all have updated their local state. And then we wait. And we wait in expectation for 10 minutes, which is really, really annoying if your coffee is getting cold. But eventually, a new block will be found in the network, and the transaction will be confirmed, which is what I sort of symbolize with the lock. So at this point, after creating a transaction, broadcasting it in the network, waiting for a confirmation, getting a confirmation, I can finally drink my cold coffee, which I hopefully ordered iced, because otherwise it would be cold anyway. So Bitcoin isn't really well suited for at least these kinds of real-time interactions. We mostly use Bitcoin for large amount, slow transactions. That's okay if you're buying a car and have to sign paperwork anyway, because I can enter the car dealership, I can start signing my papers and do the transaction in the background. But when I'm waiting at the point of sale and in a bar or at the grocery store, that's definitely not what I want. I don't want to hang around 15 minutes just to confirm my transaction. Okay, so what are the limits of Bitcoin? The limits are quite easy. First of all, scalability. So there is a limited number of transactions we can perform on the Bitcoin blockchain before it all falls to pieces. We've seen that previously this year when the transaction fees skyrocketed and you were suddenly paying like $5 per transaction. That's sort of an important backup mechanism, self-regulating mechanism, so that only transactions that are actually worth the effort are actually making it into the blockchain. But it's sort of annoying that you can't buy coffee anymore with blockchain. There are privacy concerns. Every transaction you perform on the Bitcoin blockchain will be seen by every node in the network. It will be archived by every node in the network. And this is a treasure trove for people that are trying to data mine profiles out of that information. If I get my salary in Bitcoin and then turn around and buy coffee, I might be okay with my employer knowing that I buy coffee. But what if I go on Silk Road, for example? Silk Road, by the way, is a drugstore, or was a drugstore for a long time. And I definitely don't want to have my employer knowing that I buy drugs. Well, they might be okay with it, but. And furthermore, we have an extensibility problem because we now have a system where it is paramount for us, for everybody to adhere to the same rules in the network. We all need to have this exact same rules about what is valid in Bitcoin and what isn't. And there have been quite a few issues where wallets or Bitcoin nodes have implemented slightly different rules, and we suddenly didn't agree anymore, and we just forked the network. So one part thought I still had all of my money, and the other part thought, okay, yeah, he paid the barista. And that happens both accidentally as well as on purpose. So a case of accidentally might be we had in 2013 we had a bug where we had a file descriptor overflow in a Berkeley DB that we were using, and an upgrade fixed that. Now, some parts of the network upgraded and thought, okay, yeah, that's okay. The bug wasn't hit anymore. And on the old part of the network, they were still hitting the bug, and we're like, okay, yeah, that block isn't valid. Whereas the new, the upgraded part of the network was like, okay, that works. I'm fine. So we had an accidental fork there. And there's also purposeful forks. Okay, so scalability, everybody knows about the block size limit of 1 megabyte, but it's only one in a series of physical limits that we are actually limited by. So for example, the disk space, if every single participant in the network were to buy a 10 terabyte disk every year, then we would be limited to 500 transactions per second. And 10,000 nodes or 20,000 nodes or whatever it is now times 10 terabytes a year, that's a massive amount of storage. This is basically just a broadcast medium that we're all writing our coffee transactions in, and that's not going to work out forever. Processing power. Processing a transaction takes about 5 milliseconds. So just verifying the validity of a transaction turns out to limit us to 200 transactions per second. Network bandwidth. Back in 2013, when I started my PhD, my first work was basically just measuring how quickly we can propagate information in the Bitcoin network itself. And it turns out that that if we go above a threshold, here symbolized by about 100 transactions per second, we actually do not have time to converge to a consistent state before different parts of the network generate a new block. And so we have a divergent network. Basically, your nice strict chain devolves into a tree. And depending on which branch of the tree you are on, you either believe my transaction to be valid or not. And that's not a good case for a currency. And then, of course, we have the artificial 1 megabyte limit, which currently limits us to 4 to 7 transactions a second. And this is artificial. It was introduced as a spam protection by Satoshi himself back in 2012 or 2011. I don't remember. But if we were to remove it now, that would mean that we suddenly disagree again on what is valid. So a part of the network would believe that, yes, this is valid because it's 2 megabyte block, and the other part would say, no, that's not valid in my book. But there's ways around that. Okay. Privacy is the second issue that we're tackling here. Just briefly, this is a graph that was done by a group called WITSEC. They traced the stolen 650,000 bitcoins that were stolen from Mt. Gox to other exchanges. And if you look really closely, down there is my name because I managed to make it on the New York Times front page as the idiot doctorate student who lost 9,000 bitcoins. And finally, the extensibility problem. What if we have new applications that we would like to add to Bitcoin? We would actually have to tell everybody or convince everybody in the network to actually upgrade and suddenly change the rules so that they can, that they will agree with us about the new rules. And here I usually just cite the Unix philosophies, basically saying that Bitcoin shouldn't be a catch-all that does everything. It should be a tool that does one thing, but it does it well. Okay. So let's get started with the actual Lightning part of this talk. Lightning is what we call a layer 2 or an off-chain protocol. And all of these off-chain protocols have a similar structure. And they usually have a setup phase, a negotiation phase, and a settlement phase. A setup phase is where we lock in some funds, where we allocate funds to an off-chain contract. Once we have locked in these funds, we can no longer unilaterally decide on what happens to these funds. The negotiation phase is basically where we renegotiate on who owns what part of these funds. And the settlement is where we actually enforce this agreement on the Bitcoin blockchain. So the same just as an image, we have on the lower part, we have our broadcast medium, our blockchain, which creates one block after the other, incrementally adding to a transaction history for the entire world. And at some point, we decide, okay, yeah, let's set up a new off-chain contract. the off-chain contract basically is just nothing else than us creating a transaction that takes some funds, sets them aside, so that we have to agree on what happens to them. Then we negotiate and renegotiate on who should get what part of the funds that we just set aside. Meanwhile, the Bitcoin blockchain also proceeds in parallel, but we don't care too much. And eventually, we will take our final state of the that we renegotiated over and over again and reapply it to the Bitcoin blockchain, at which point we actually have now settled our contract and are free to go wherever we want again. What the Bitcoin blockchain sees is the setup transaction that first allocated funds to our contract, and the settlement phase, the settlement transaction which reallocated the funds like we decided off-chain. Everything that happened in between is invisible to any observer on the blockchain. All just happened between us two endpoints. Okay. So the major technical problem that we have to solve in these off-chain contracts is that we have to somehow ensure that if I put 10 euros on a table, these 10 and we now have to agree on how to split them. Initially, all 10 of these euros will belong to me, and then we renegotiate, and at some point, my counterparty will own like 5 of these euros, and I own 5, and then we need to go. Then we need to settle, but only the last state should be enforceable on the blockchain. We should make sure that I can't go to the blockchain and say, hey, by the way, I had this state where I had like 10 euros. Please give me back my 10 euros instead of the 5 euros we agreed upon. And that's where replacement strategies come into play. Replacement strategies basically allow us to replace a prior state with a newer state in such a way that the prior state will no longer be enforceable on the blockchain. And I'll present 3 of them. The first one is the really simple micropayment channels that we've known since 2011. It's a construction by Spielmann et al. And it basically just says, one party receives funds, and the other party doesn't have any say in what happens. And that's the simple micropayment channel. Okay, so the simple micropayment channel basically starts with me. In this case, I'm the green participant. I have 5 bitcoins at some point. I create a setup transaction which locks in these 5 bitcoins in what's called a multi-sig address, where both the green and the blue participant have to agree on what happens to these funds. Okay, so both parties, both green and blue, need to sign any transaction that spends those funds. Now we start the negotiation phase. So now I basically just create a settlement transaction that gives 5 of these bitcoins back to me and 0 to my counterparty. Now, I sign this transaction, indicated by the green square. But this transaction still isn't complete right now because, well, the blue signature is missing. So what I do is I now confirm this the setup transaction, and I hand the first settlement transaction that gives 5 bitcoins back to me and 0 to my counterparty. I give this half-signed transaction to my counterparty. Now my counterparty has the option of either adding his signature and sending it to the blockchain and therefore settling, or he can say, maybe the green guy comes back, maybe he wants to have an update. I'll just keep it in my back pocket for now. And indeed, after a while, I come back and say, hey, I now want to buy stuff from you. Here's a new settlement transaction in which you get 1 bitcoin, I get 4, and I sign it, and I hand it over to my counterparty. And the counterparty says, okay, yeah, this guarantees me that if I add my signature and I go to the blockchain, I will get 1 Bitcoin. So we just made an incremental payment. And we can do that a few more times until eventually either I run out of money, meaning that all of the funds in the channel are owned by the counterparty, or I decide I'm moving away, I'm not buying coffee from you anymore, please close the channel. At this point, my counterparty will add his signature, will broadcast the transaction to the network, and eventually it will just confirm, at which point we have settled our channel. So this is the simple micropayment channel construction that has been known for the last 6 years. Are there any questions so far on how this one works? Yeah.
What if the blue guy just goes offline and does not answer anymore?
Indeed. So the question was, what happens if one of the parties just goes away? If I go away, I will eventually get my money back because the other one can still settle it. If the blue guy goes away, then we have indeed a problem. And there's ways around how we can fix that. I left it out here because that makes it really complex. There's what's called a time-locked transaction, which basically is signed by both parties, but only valid in a year or so. And I get that one. And so if the channel is still open in a year, I can basically just dig up this old transaction. It's now valid. It's signed by both parties. And I can get my funds back. So my counterparty is guaranteeing to me that I will eventually get my funds back.
There's a wallet that supports this. It's called Green Address.
I know, we acquired them. Yeah, so Green Address does something very similar where you have a 2 out of 3 multi-sig where, actually no, the time-locked variant is a 2 out of 2. But there are ways, this is a way where we can lock in funds in such a way that no party will end up losing money in the end, yes. Okay. So the second construction actually uses time-locked transactions in a very different way. And this is a paper that I wrote in 2014. It's not had much success, but yeah. Okay, so what we do, we have the setup just like before. I create a multi-sig account in which I allocate some funds to the channel, and we now have to agree on what happens. And the settlement transaction we create has a time lock, so it's only valid in, let's say, 100 days. And we both sign it. And we both have it. So should one party disappear, then either party can go and say, hey, I'd like to settle this transaction. Now, why are we doing this if we have the simple micropayment channel? The simple micropayment channel is very limited in that funds can only flow in one direction. We had this asymmetry where my counterparty had the fully signed transaction, but I didn't. Because if I also had a fully signed transaction, I could go and basically have an old state and try to commit that to the blockchain, basically going back in time and rescinding on my promise to honor our updates. So what we do here is basically we say, okay, we have the current state, which is 5 and 0 initially. So all of the 5 Bitcoins are owned by me. But this will only be valid in 100 days. If we now want to update this, we just say, okay, here's an updated transaction that gives me 4 and the barista a 1, but it's already valid in 99 days. So once we approach the time lock, we now have a period wherein only the latest state is valid, and we can actually get this transaction confirmed, and if we confirm it before the other one becomes valid, we're safe. And we can actually move funds back and forth we're no longer limited to just sending funds in one direction. And eventually, we were happy with what happened, and we just say, let's forget about the time locks. Let's settle right now. So we create a settlement transaction that does not have any time locks. It reflects the latest state, and we just send it to the blockchain, and we confirm it. OK, so this is the second construction, and we're getting to Lightning. Are there any questions? Correct, yes. Though that's an optimization I did not describe. Good point. I should update that paper. That's a good find, actually.
But if you don't update the time lock, both contracts could be settled. So you could settle the old one at the same time as your counterparty.
Well, you can half sign. So sort of a combination of the simple one and the duplex market payment channels. At which point you actually have direction changes, and only the only the sending side has to pre-sign, and it actually works out nicely.
Is there any big downside to this? So I don't see it.
So the downside here is that we have a fixed lifetime. So if we want to keep this channel open for more than 100 days, we're out of luck, because we're counting down on time locks. We can work around those, but it sort of gets ugly. We're also limited by the range, because if we have a time lock of 50, and today is the 50th day, we also have to close, right? And to work around that, we came up with what's called an invalidation tree, in which we have a whole tree of descending time locks, and it sort of gets ugly because you have these long chains of transactions that need to go on chain to settle.
That one is known as Lightning Factory?
So the channel factories use this one because it's a bit. This construction is nice because there is no asymmetry in information about who misbehaved and who needs to be punished, and that's what we get into with the next system, Lightning. Okay. Okay, and finally, let's look at what Lightning does. So Lightning is an alternative construction. We sort of came up at the same time, and they managed to scoop me. But I joined forces with them, so all is right. So in Lightning, we have an asymmetry in information, and that's why I colored the upper and the lower half in different colors. Are the colors more or less visible back there? They're different, I can tell you. OK, so now instead of creating one settlement transaction or one state transaction, we create two of them. The two state transactions are different for the different parties. So they do represent the same state, but if the upper transaction makes it into the blockchain, that's the state that is owned by the green node. Then the blue node gets a chance to retaliate against this transaction should it not be the latest one. OK? So how do we do an update in Lightning? We basically just say, OK, let's create a new set of transactions, asymmetric as before. But now we have this case where both the old state and the new state could end up on the blockchain. So what do? Well, we write scripts into the outputs in such a way that if I ever publish an old transaction, then the other side can grab my funds. So let me look at the example here, because it's kind of hard. OK, so if we now publish the old state for the green node, so meaning the upper one, then we have given the counterparty a transaction that allows them to grab my funds. So I'm the green one, I'm misbehaving, I'm publishing an old state. Now a timer starts to tick. And as long as this timer ticks, the fate of my funds are unclear. If this is indeed an old state and my counterparty can prove on the blockchain that this is an old state, then they can grab the funds that did belong to me without me having any say in this. If the timer expires and the counterparty could not prove that this is an old state, this means that either the old party is offline and unable to react, which is bad. You should not be offline in the Lightning Network. Or this is indeed the latest state, which we haven't invalidated. And so what we have is basically, we have at T1, we have both a set of retaliation transactions in the case the counterparty misbehaves, and we have a set of current state transactions that represent our current state. And we can continue that a few times until eventually we get bored and run out of space to draw fancy boxes. So I have a slide about the script of these outputs, but it's kind of hard to see. Would you guys be interested in seeing that one? Of course, so that means I quickly need to edit my slides.
Maybe a quick question before that?
Yeah.
So, like in the T1 example, the retaliation transaction actually gives you more funds, but it always gives you all the ones?
Yes.
Because it looks like in the last example you got less. Maybe I didn't understand that wrong.
So what you get, so if I'm the green node, so I have all of this information, right? So if I misbehave and now publish this transaction onto the blockchain, it's an old transaction, so the blue node should be able to grab them. So the blue node has this transaction, which gives him my 4 Bitcoins. So these belong to me in the old state, but are now being rewritten to be his. But I also get my original balance. So in the end, I will end up with all 5 in the channel. So I get this one and this one. We could simplify it by claiming all of the outputs and just saying 5, but yeah.
To be able to punish my counterparty if he cheats, I need to keep all the states that ever existed on the channel, right?
What you do need is a way to reconstruct them. Okay. So, or rather, you need to have a secret associated with that state.
Because I know that there is a secret inside that I know that I can use to take his funds if he cheats. I need to keep all the secrets for every state that ever happened on the channel.
So okay. just let me show the next slide, maybe, if I can find it. Apparently, I can't do full screen on this one because it's hidden. So what we do is basically we set up the outputs of the states that go to us. We set it with a trap. This trap basically says, if the counterparty can show me a pre-image to a hash that I generated, then that means that, that I cheated and he should get the funds. So, yeah. So pre-image of a hash basically is just, so a hash function is a one-way function. A hash basically takes some input and creates a random-looking, non-predictable output in such a way that if I have the output, I can't go back through that function. So The pre-image is basically what I put into the hash function, and the hash is what I get out of the hash function. And since there is no way for me to go back through that hash function, I can't actually cheat by saying, I generated this by self, you're out of luck. So the outputs of the transactions transaction are actually blue after this is my output if the timer expires, or the other sides if he can show me the pre-image. So what we do in an update is basically what I like to call I promise you that I won't go back on my word, and if I should do that, here's the shotgun you can shoot me with.
Yeah, but I need to keep that.
Yes,
I need to back it up.
You need to keep that shotgun somewhere. There's constructions where we can actually deterministically derive these. Okay. So you can actually subsume multiple secrets into a tree of secrets, so that I only ever need to hold a fixed number of secrets for exponentially many secrets. So what the simplest construction is basically a hash chain where you take an initial secret, you hash it once, then you hash it again, you hash it again, you hash it again. And then the first pre-image is this one. And by me revealing the previous one, this will also be the hash that I will condition on for the next one, right?
So kind of like rainbow tables work.
Yes. So if I have the nth, I can derive every secret that was n plus 1 or n forward. Yeah.
I understand that they have to keep the secret to be on the safe side, but I also understand that lightning should be lightning fast. So will there be an issue that I'm too slow to store my secret? Is this always only with two parties? How, like if there would be three of us that want to do business together, do we need to send
The transfer is atomic, and that's probably the next slide or so.
There were fees already mentioned. Fees in Lightning are for forwarding transactions.
Yes.
So if there's just a payment channel between two people, there are no fees.
Well, who would you pay the fees to?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can give you some more money, but
Okay.
yeah. So we reintroduced the notion of fees into the Lightning Network, so that you sort of have an incentive to open a channel and forward remote payments. Otherwise, you wouldn't really do that. The fees, however, are in the order of 1 Satoshi to 2 Satoshis per payment, which is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So currently, it's actually a bit more than 1 millionth of a Eurocent. But I guess for a coffee, you probably are still okay. Yeah. So let me quickly find my mouse. Will this work? Of course it won't. Yeah. Never be offline when presenting. So what I just showed you is the update mechanism we have in Lightning. But Lightning, as we write the specification nowadays, has evolved into much, much more than just this update mechanism. For example, we have a transport layer which is encrypted and ensures authenticity. We have a framing and feature negotiation layer that allows us to negotiate which features of the Bitcoin protocol we should use, and also which update mechanism we want to use. I've put the Allen penalty, which is the latest update mechanism I showed you, and the duplex micropayment channel update mechanism in there. There may be more with different trade-offs. We also have a gossip protocol, which allows us to disseminate information about which channels are open, how do you get from point A to point B through 5 hops or so. We have the HLC construction, which allows us to do these atomic transfers over multiple hops. And we have the onion routing protocol, Sphinx, which allows us to actually forward a payment through multiple hops without these hops learning who the endpoints are. So I could send you a payment, you could forward it to someone else, he could forward it to someone else again, and then eventually it will reach the bar. But every single hop will only see I got some funds on the left, and I got the instruction to forward it to the right. But whether this is the initial sender or the intended recipient, I don't know anything about that. Yes?
So is there like a locking of funds? So basically, so you say, okay, you get a request to forward funds. Does that mean you have to retain those funds until that is actually executed?
So there is no reservation mechanism as such. What we do have is so the HTLC layer is actually what we use to dedicate funds to a forwarded payment. So when I receive the instruction to forward the payment to my next hop, I receive an HTLC that promises me some funds if I forward this. At this point, I will take some funds and dedicate them to this HTLC and basically forward the promise. It's not really a reservation because once it reaches the endpoint, you actually can trigger the entire chain of promises atomically. So there is no way of unlocking without the payment going through or failing. If one channel closes, and the HTLC has not reached that channel yet, the HTLCs will fail backwards immediately. If I forwarded it, we have a timeout that we need to consider because we don't really know, has this reached the intended recipient or not? And so there we have a mechanism where we can where we have a timeout and then decide, okay, yeah, this actually reached the final the intended recipient or not. Okay. This is all in the Lightning specification. So for those that don't know, the Lightning network is being created by 3 companies, and Blockstream is but one of them. We met a year and a half ago and started writing down the specification, and now we are slowly deploying it. And what's really nice about this is that all 3 companies pitch in a lot of effort, and it's a really nice change to have a really nice community rather than all the bitching that is going on the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash mailing lists and what have you not. It's really nice to work on off-chain protocols. No need to convince the whole world. You just need to convince your counterparty. Yeah.
Question, we have limits due to the capacity of the specific channels.
Yes.
And I read that it's possible to use multiple routes at the same time to make an atomic payment. Is that part of Lightning already, or is this just some ideas that are being developed right now?
So it's not part of the version 1.0 of the specification, but it's definitely on the roadmap for the next version, and it's a nice feature to have. So yes, but mostly we probably want to use the Lightning network for smaller payments anyway initially, sort of to test out the limits of what is feasible, and because at some point Lightning payments get more expensive than on-chain payments, and you should use on-chain payments for such large transfers. Okay. Yep.
What you said about HTLC kind of reminded me of what I saw in a presentation about interledger. Does it like use similar principles and interact somehow, like for cross-ledger payments? Or is there any?
Yes. So the HTLC construction is pretty similar to what other atomic cross-chain swap protocols do. it all hinges on me being able to promise you some value in exchange for a secret. And so if I promise you a Litecoin in exchange for the pre-image of a hash, and you promise to me 0.1 Bitcoins in exchange for the same secret, and I have the secret, I can give it to you, and at the same time I will be able to, so by me cashing in on the Bitcoin, I will release to you the Litecoin. So the entire HLC constructions are very similar. Let me just quickly go ahead and, because I actually had slides for these. Yeah. So the HLC construction, actually here I have scripts, has again 2 branches. The upper branch basically says, if you can show me a secret that matches this hash, then the funds are yours. If, however, you don't in the next 6 hours, which is the else branch, the blue one, then I can claim those funds by myself. And this basically allows me to promise to you in a secure way some funds, and you may get them only if you have the secret. If you don't have the secret, but I tell you who does have it, you can actually forward the payment and then get the secret from upstream and cash in from downstream. Okay. Yeah, onion routing, I spoke about that. Okay, so this is my last slide. After that, I need a break. So the advantages of the Lightning Network. First of all, we have improved scalability. We now have the ability to move funds back and forward between 2 endpoints, or in fact any reachable nodes in the extended graph of the Lightning Network, without ever involving the blockchain itself for the individual transfers. Only the aggregates will end up on the blockchain. And yeah, so what the blockchain will see is a setup transaction and a settlement transaction. Everything in between is private, which also brings me to the third point. Nothing of this is touching, no single transfer is touching the blockchain and will be recorded for eternity. Only aggregates will be recorded on the blockchain, making it a bit more hard to actually create profiles out of this. And also the aggregate of the transfers include the forwarded payments. So the information you learn out of that aggregate does not tell you very much about the individual endpoints of a channel. And it doesn't really tell you much about what was exchanged for that by any means. We have real-time transfers. Real-time because me promising to you some funds or us updating the state of our off-chain contract happens at the same speed we can communicate. No need to wait for a confirmation, no need to wait for a block, no need to wait for multiple blocks. These updates are final when they are signed. And finally, what I mentioned before, working on off-chain protocols is really nice. You don't have to convince the entirety of the world that what you're doing is sensible. You can actually, you just need a counterparty that commits some.
Mentioned like log times of 100 days.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify if I understand it right, because what I get is like in Lightning, you don't have like a fixed number of days, so you can keep a channel perpetually open.
Yeah.
It's not actually necessary to close it. Is that right?
On my laptop? Yes, you can't keep the channels open indefinitely. There is a limit on how many updates you can do, but that's 48 updates. So it should last us until the heat death of the universe, I guess. I think back there was.
Who is paying the fee for the closing block and the starting block?
So who's paying the fees for the setup and the settlement transaction? The endpoints of the channel are. So basically, while running the channel, you accumulate some fees. Also, because you eventually will have to go on chain and pay these fees. So, yeah. And you also need to be compensated for the loss of opportunity. If you have funds, you could have put them in a bank and made some interest out of it. So let's make the Lightning channel a good investment of your funds. I lost track, I guess.
I have a related question.
Yeah. Okay.
The autopilot feature. How is it protecting me against automatically opening channels to nodes which disappear and I pay the on-chain fees for opening the channels?
So the autopilot is intended to open channels for you, so that you basically download the app on your phone and you charge some money on top of it, and then once you're at the shop, you already have channels open. We do not have a good protection against opening channels to peers that are closing immediately to you and letting you sit on the closing fees. That's indeed one part where we sort of are still looking for solutions. One counter argument is that why would they close it if they can get some utility out of it as well?
Yeah, if they are miners and want to collect the
yeah, I mean, there's only so many miners that will go for that trick, but many more people that are interested in you routing payments through them and hence getting fees for that. So we'll need to see how that works out in a real network. I can't give you a definitive answer. Many of these things, by the way, this is an experiment. I don't have all the answers. I can only make educated guesses, just like you guys do. So yes.
If I want to run my own Lightning node, why should I use Blockstream over LND? Or can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the differences?
Yes. So the three companies, by the way, are Async from Paris. I always fall back into my French accent when I say Async. Then there's Lightning Labs, founded by the authors of the original paper, and now led by Elizabeth Stark and Rosebeef. And there's the C Lightning implementation by me and Rusty. You can choose freely. They sort of have a bit of a different target audience. So Eclair, for example, the Async implementation is written in Scala and runs on a mobile phone. If you'd like to just have a mobile phone app and pay through that, that's an excellent choice. If you want to run on a desktop, for example, I definitely suggest LND by Lightning Labs. It's written in Go. It's a very extensively tested node. And being written in Go, you can actually cross-compile it for a lot of platforms. C Lightning is more geared towards enterprise applications. It's written in C, only supports Linux, so probably more for the enterprise hobbyist market, and less for occasional users. Sounds fair?
What's a big requirement for Lightning servers or nodes? So is it CPU, is it network, what is it?
That's a hard one. Currently it's CPU because we're not very clever about how we synchronize the gossip state on the network. So whenever you open a new connection, you're actually verifying thousands of signatures. So that will actually keep your CPU pegged for a while.
I think we take 2 more questions, please, because you said you need a break, and we have pizza here, and afterwards maybe we have the chance to have some more questions. Maybe it depends on Christian, and we have also tomorrow the hack day. So I want to be fair, 2 more questions and then we have to break. Do you agree? Or
Sure, yes. I could do with some pizza. Being fair, you choose who the lucky ones are and who aren't.
Here we have the one. Let's start with the white shirt and then you would choose the question.
Is there any solution to still publish the redeeming transactions when there is a congestion? In case that suddenly a big node is like publishing a false state and everyone has to publish the redeeming transactions, and then suddenly maybe it doesn't fit and you don't make it until the load time expires.
So the comment was that if we have sort of a thundering herd scenario where everybody wants to close their channel now, and we rush to the blockchain only to find it that it's out of capacity, that might be a problem. Yes. What we can do against that is to separate the failure cases for individual nodes such that we don't actually have a thundering herd scenario. And the ultimate goal for Lightning is to take off the load from the Bitcoin network, such that the Bitcoin network becomes more reliable, and we basically handle all the nitty-bitty payments, and Bitcoin is there for the large important parts. And so hopefully once, if we have such a scenario, we actually have the space to close these channels.
Okay.
One block has about 200 to 300 transactions that fit in there. The current network is about 5,000 channels. We can close all of them in 2 blocks, and our security parameters currently are for 144, aka 1-day blocks, or I think the most extreme case was 1 week to close the channels, in which case we have like 1,008 blocks space. That should get us to about 2 million channels that we can close in time.
I have read an article about the Lightning Network that said that there would be transaction fees for forwarding the transactions in the Lightning Network.
Yes.
So is there an estimate how high these fees would be per transaction?
So currently the defaults are pretty low. So we basically just have set the defaults at the lowest possible level. So we have a base fee and a proportional fee. The base fee is per payment, and the proportional fee is multiplied by the value that's being transferred. The base fee, the default value currently is 1 Satoshi, or 1/1,000,000th of a eurocent. And the proportional fee is denominated in millionths of a Satoshi.
Okay.
So you'd actually need to have to transfer 1 million Satoshi to have 1 Satoshi additional fees.
Okay.
But
it's far below the fees that the Bitcoin blockchain is.
That's definitely the goal, yes. And everybody's free to set their own fees, so we don't have a huge control over what these fees are. If you bridge two parts of the network that are otherwise disconnected, you might leverage some higher fees, but that might also incentivize people to join you in bridging that gap. So we'll see how that network turns out to be, and hopefully low fees.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much. Just a real quick information. Tomorrow is a hack day, and it will be in Berg 1 starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thanks to Daniel Wingen for organizing and getting the location. Also thank you for streaming this tonight. Now we have time for a break and for pizza in around about half an hour. If Christian is still available for us, then we proceed with some more questions and some discussion. Thanks.
Sure.
Excuse me.